This evening we have Andrew Rondeau, software engineer at VMware, and Jeff Jones, physics grad student at UCSC, making a presentation on what if information were free, and then leading a discussion. So, please welcome Andrew.
So hi, I'm Andrew Rondeau. I'm talking about basically what if information were free, or another way to say is what are the implications when you can instantly access information. And as an overview, we're moving to a world where access to information is perceivably free. You're not aware of the cost of accessing this information, and it's becoming instant. You can access this information roughly anytime you want, anywhere you want, anywhere in the globe. And as a result, our 20th century economic models of generating information are failing. And what I'd like to discuss is what kind of a world is going to exist effectively when this happens, when you really can get any information you want for free. And I'll go into more details during the presentation. Okay. So the way I'm structuring this presentation is I'm going to talk about past, recent, present, and future. And the reason why I say recent present is it's easier to talk about the present because the recent present, I'd say, is maybe up until the 90s, turn of the century, basically time before Napster. We're in a transition between that recent present and the future. For each period, past, recent, present, and future, I'm going to ask a few questions with Jeff. One of them is just how do you read the latest literature? How do you hear the latest composer, the latest music? If you want to hear it, what are your options? And how do you learn facts? If you have a question, how do you get it answered? Okay. So for the past, and this is a long time ago, if you had a book and you wanted to publish that information, it had to be copied by hand. And there's a story about monks copying Bibles in what are called scriptoriums. And at this time, before the printing press, the estimated value of a Bible in today's dollars is anywhere between $150,000 to $200,000. So if you wanted, you could either own a Bible or you could own a home in the Midwest. And then another way for literature would be storytellers or scribes. Literature wouldn't be written, but it would be a story that would be told in a setting similar to here, orally. I think I had to read Beowulf when I was in high school. It used to be an orally passed story. At this time, there was limited education. Very few people could read. So if you wanted to know a fact, you couldn't just go to the library and pick up a book because there weren't a lot of books, and also because you probably couldn't read. So you could only learn facts by talking to people. Transitioning to music. If you wanted to hear the latest music, how would you hear it? You kind of had to be at the right place at the right time. If you wanted to hear a particular style of music, you had to live in that area or travel to that area. You had to be present when it was being played, or you had to be able to play it yourself.
Unlike the situation we have now where it's foisted upon us.
Yeah.
Would you like me to talk to them? They have trouble controlling different speakers, but if you like, I'll go see if I can get this turned down.
Yeah, I'd appreciate that. Yeah. And what the conclusion that I say is, in the past, but basically before the printing press, there was more information than copying capacity. Meaning that if you generated information, there was limited capacity to broadcast this information and make it available to other people. So, to continue and talk about how the past relates to some political issues we're having today with regard to copyright. In the past, copyright wasn't invented. And I'm kind of stating the obvious when I say that. but there was no need for copyright in the past. There's an anecdote. I don't know if anyone here has ever watched Richard Gere. I'll have to look at the notes. The show Connections. There's an anecdote about the Library of Alexandria, where in the city there was a decree where if you traveled through the city and you had books, you had to lend your books to the library, and the library would copy them. And then it goes to say sometimes the copies were so good that you'd be given the copies back. But what that goes to say is that in the past, copyright was counterintuitive. If you wanted to spread information, you couldn't worry about copyright. Another anecdote is that piracy was not economically viable. It cost so much to copy a book that if you were going to pirate a book, you were going to end up paying the same amount of money by hiring a slave, or you'd be sitting for a few months copying the book. It just wasn't a concept. Thus, again, copyright wasn't in it.
And I just realized I put the totally wrong date on there just now. he was already long dead.
Yeah.
But so when I think about this whole topic, we're going to be switching off.
Can you speak up a little bit louder? Because they're making
Yeah. So
a latte.
when I think about this whole topic and the issue of the past,
Nobody ordered a latte during the meeting.
one of the first people I think of who had strong opinions on information and the differences between information and regular material goods was Thomas Jefferson, and he was one of the founders of our country and the president. He was also an inventor, and so he did a lot of inventing, and then he ended up actually serving on as the head of the patent. There was a board that they constructed when they first set up patent law, and he was the head of the 3-person board that got to oversee who approved the patents and who didn't. But he had very strong opinions on this, and I'm going to read this quote. So he said, "If nature has made any one thing less susceptible than all others of exclusive property, it's the action of the thinking power called an idea, which an individual may exclusively possess as long as he keeps it to himself. But the moment it's divulged, it forces itself into the possession of everyone, and the receiver cannot dispossess himself of it. And its peculiar character, too, is that no one possesses the less because everyone possesses the whole of it. He who receives an idea from me receives instruction himself without lessening mine, as he who lights my taper at mine receives light without darkening me. That ideas should freely spread from one to another over the globe for the moral and mutual instruction of man and improvement of his condition seems to have been peculiarly and benevolently designed by nature, when she made them like fire, expansible over all space, without lessening their density at any point, and like the air in which we breathe, move, and have our physical being, incapable of confinement or exclusive appropriation. Inventions, then, cannot in nature be subject of property." So this sounds rather extreme, especially in the context of today. Now, back then, now he's talking about ideas, and this especially seems ironic considering he's in charge of the patent system, and he's saying here, ideas cannot be property, and in some sense, patents and copyrights are an attempt to make ideas and information property. So he did change his mind a little bit over the course of his life. This quote is actually toward the end of his life, after he had been president, after he had served on, and after he had kind of watered down some of his beliefs. So in the beginning, he was completely opposed to patents, and then he realized when, then he started to be in favor of a minimalist system of patenting, and he saw it, and the reason for that was he saw it as a way of forcing people to make their ideas public, so that if without the patent system, you could have one person working on an idea their whole life, working on an invention. They die and they never actually get anywhere, then nobody can benefit from that information. If you have a patent system, then it goes on public record and everyone can benefit from from it, but then you also reward and encourage people to contribute ideas by giving them an exclusive benefit for the first few years or so, and it's around 20 years that patents typically last. And then, but he was very careful, and he was concerned about the issue of creating artificial monopolies because of these. If one company or one individual gets a patent and then they control that idea for their whole life, then it creates a barrier of entry. They're the only one who can provide a certain service, and they can charge whatever they want for that service, and so on and so forth. So all these issues were all back then, and we still have them today. But now it's worse because we have all this virtualization, and it's so much easier to exchange ideas. So, okay, so back to Andy.
Okay, recent present, and I kind of put up my CD collection and all my records. In the recent present, you can basically, anybody can access a book, compared to the past when you might not be able to read and books were incredibly expensive. A person of modest means can either go to a library or purchase a book here. Likewise, recorded music is available to people of ordinary means as well. Buy a record, buy a CD, buy a DVD. Yet the conclusion that I will say is that we're copying capacity constrained in this recent present because we're tying information to a physical object. We don't have enough copying capacity to allow everybody to afford access to every piece of music that they would like to hear. I'd like to be able to hear lots more music than I can reasonably afford legally. Sometimes it may be difficult or impossible to locate a book that you would like, that you need. An example, in my first internship, we needed to find a book by this guy named Halston, and Amazon didn't have it, none of the bookstores had it, so my boss ended up finding it at some obscure library and photocopying it after he probably spent about 15 hours or maybe 40 hours searching for the book. And another little anecdote that I'd like to point out is look at all the physical space that just my music and movies are taking up. I don't even have, I won't show you my bookshelf, it looks horrible. But like, this is about 4 feet tall, 3 feet wide, and all my records, they're about 1 foot tall, and they're again 3 feet wide. And that's a lot of space that my information is taking up.
Oh, so thoughtful.
Okay, so another thing that even again back in Jefferson's time that he was very concerned with, and why he lobbied to have the strictest possible laws that you could to keep people from filing what he called frivolous patents or obvious patents. He was very concerned with this issue of people patenting common knowledge that anyone could come up with easily, and then that really restricts things. So we've been running into these issues today. In 1997, Amazon filed a patent for one-click shopping, it's called now, and it was kind of the idea of you bypass your whole shopping cart and just click once and it just goes right to the checkout. And it seems like a pretty obvious idea, but somehow they were actually granted the patent in 1999. And then as soon as they were granted it, they sued Barnes & Noble and got them to shut down their site that had the express checkout line, which was basically the same thing, but Amazon had thought of it first, so they just... So that sort of led to exactly the sort of monopoly that Jefferson was worrying about. And consequently, there have been boycotts of Amazon and stuff like that. There's been a lot of debate on. And now they're trying to actually do the same thing. A few months ago, they filed another patent for searching for something by appending it to the URL on the end of a web URL, just appending the string, which seems like it's, I don't know if they're going to get this patent, but they seem to have a history of doing this. That's another issue with patents. Now the difference between patents and copyrights: patents are for inventions and ideas, copyrights are for works of art or software, any sort of specific thing you've created that's supposed to be a piece of tangible information as opposed to a method or a procedure. Of course, there's a whole spectrum of information. They're both, in their raw sense, just information. Copyrights last for a lot longer. The way of doing it right now is you take the lifetime of the person and add 70 years, or in the case of a corporation, it's either 120 years from the date of publication or 95 years from the time it was created. So they're a much longer period of time, whereas patents are like 20 years. Both of these, I think, are too long. Patents, especially with the changing nature of the types of things that are being patented, like in the beginning, or the type of things that are being and the type of things that are being copyrighted. So in the beginning, we were talking about books and things that are very difficult to reproduce, and now we're talking about software, and the procedures sometimes, they're not these long things that takes years to get to market. They're just simple procedures that you can do online and in 6 months have it working and have profits for the next few years, and then the next things come along and it's not even relevant anymore. So the 20-year time frame may be something to reevaluate already in the present for information technologies, and for the adding 70 years to your whole lifetime, well, that's even longer. But in some sense, it makes sense to have a longer period where it's a specific work that someone's created just because of the nature of it. So back to Andy.
Okay, so continuing on the concept of copyright, and the statement that I make is that copyright drove the era of consumable information. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to, again, define copyright and define the term consumable information. Legally, copyright is literally the right to copy. And it's kind of an obvious statement. But what it means is that when you own a copyright, you are the only entity that can legally copy that piece of information, or can legally grant someone permission to copy that piece of information. Which it's an important statement to make, because that effectively has driven production of books, production of CDs, production of movies. And we could call it a technique that evenly distributes copying capacity. And there's an anecdote about when the printing press was invented and copyright was invented. They were invented very close together. What would happen is someone would come out and they'd write a bestseller and they'd print it. And then everybody else who had a printing press would just copy the bestseller and print it. And the immediate problem was that the person who wrote the book wasn't making any money. Kind of sounds familiar. So copyright, it was invented as a way to help ensure that whoever wrote the book would make money. The other sort of consequence or non-obvious consequence is that copyright helped evenly distribute the limited copying capacity of the printing press. Just because you own the printing press didn't mean you could print anything you wanted to print. You had to basically sort of give fair access to everything that needed to be printed. Now, again, the term consumable information. I could say I'm using this term. It's any. What I'm saying is any information that's generated for profit by sale to the public. Books, CDs, DVDs, encyclopedias. And essentially, when the purpose of consumable information is to generate the information, and you get your return on investment back by point of sale purchases. So you sell the information on the open market, and everybody who wants to use that information has to act as a consumer.
Can I ask you a question?
Sure.
I'm feeling unclear about the difference between the information or the creative work that's generated and these consumable stuffs that are associated with it. So, for example, there are musicians like Fugazi who have a pretty strict perspective on how they perceive them making their art relates to how they're going to have it copied and sold and distributed. And it seems to me that an author or an artist is not necessarily generating what you're defining as consumable information, in that they are not generating it for profit by sale to the general public necessarily. And I guess it seems like there's a difference when you're talking about the copywriting works versus the distribution of stuff associated with that. And I wanted to talk a little more about that.
What I'm saying is that the economic model for your basically, if you're an author, a musician, a screenwriter, you gotta eat, you gotta have a car, you need money to do that. How are you going to get the money to do that? You need an economic model to generate income as off of generating information.
But ultimately, the economic model is I'm employed by a studio, I'm paid by an agent, I'm connected to a person, and then they're managing and dealing with that information.
And how do they end up making money?
Right, through this information being distributed. Although art works very different.
Through consumers.
With copyable things, sure. Yeah.
Yes. So, are you supporting my point?
I think that I'm very cognizant of having worked recently with a lot of artists and scientists and thinking about ideas that are not as distributed.
Why don't we bring this up in the discussion?
Okay, that's fine.
So, contrasting consumable information is non-consumable information. And non-consumable information is where the return on investment comes from means that aren't through point of sale, aren't through consumerism. For example, a private report owned by a corporation, that information is going to generate money by the information being valuable to the company, not by the corporation turning around and selling these reports on an open market. Academic papers. I'm not in school, but your school may sponsor you, or you may get a grant for an academic paper, but you're not turning around and selling this paper on the open market as a means of supporting yourself during school. And broadcast television, some of it is a model of non-consumable information, specifically stuff like the news. A series that is sold as a DVD, that falls more under consumable information. But like the Today Show, where you're not really buying a DVD of the Today Show, you're just turning it on and watching it every morning, that's non-consumable information. So for the future, what's coming down the pipe? And what I've done here is I'm holding my iPod in my hand, and in the background are most of my vinyl records. And the point that I'm trying to make is that all my vinyl records, for all the physical space that they're taking up, which is probably about 3 to 4 cubic feet, there's less information in that 3 to 4 cubic feet than is stored in my iPod. So the space that you need to store information is shrinking. So again, what's coming down the pipe? You have basically, you could eventually possibly have an iPod prepackaged with all 20th century music. Buy the iPod, the Beatles are on it, the Monkees are on it, the Beach Boys are on it. You might not listen to The Fifth Dimension, but it's there if you want to hear it. Another thing that could come down the pipe is a smart Google. A smart Google is something that you can ask a question and it'll be able to give you a decent answer. Meaning, if I want to know who John Lennon's wife is, in the 80s, if I didn't have a book about John Lennon, I'd have to drive to the library, find the book, and it might take me 2-3 hours. In the internet age, I can type in John Lennon into Google or John Lennon into Wikipedia, and in maybe about 3 or 4 minutes, I can infer that, oh yeah, Yoko Ono is his wife. But with a smart Google, you can ask it, who was John Lennon's wife? And it will immediately tell you, Yoko Ono is John Lennon's wife. Another thing that's coming down the pipe is instant access to media. And we're already seeing a lot of this today. Netflix now does on demand. My cable box does on demand. There's Napster on demand. This is a trend that is irreversible. You will be able to open up a program, open up a website, and get more and more stuff available to you when you want to have it instantly, or maybe with a 2 or 3 second buffering delay. Now this is sort of where I get to be a little bit more philosophical, but I'm sure all of you have seen or probably owned a Bluetooth headset. And well, what do you think? What can happen? You might have a Bluetooth headset, but what also happens when you have a little display for your iPhone that you can just move to the corner of your glasses? There's another invention out there called brain fingers, which is it's currently meant and marketed towards disabled people, and it's a headband that feels the top of your head, and it's used to control the computer. Well, at some point, brain fingers and the display glued to your glasses can be integrated with a Bluetooth headset that is kind of sort of fashionable. And you're then wearing your iPhone. You don't need to pull your iPhone out of your pocket to use the smart Google to find out who is John Lennon's wife. Now, I'm going to get even a little more out there and speculative. At what point does something like the iPhone become an implant? At what point are you able to send an IM to someone just by thinking? Does that mean you're telepathic? And in this mode where, you might be laughing, I don't blame you. In this mode of this telepathic, I can think to send information. How is the 20th century model of selling a physical, tangible item like a 12-tool CD or a movie? How's that going to work? So again, the questions that I'd say I'd answer. In the future, when these wearable computers, smart Google comes down the pipe, well, you can read the latest literature because it will just show up in your little display in your wearable iPhone, or it could be projected into your brain. You can hear the latest music because your iPhone will be able to access it and it will come through your wearable headset. Or you can just know facts by asking the wearable. And the statement that I'm going to make is that in this era, when you're having wearable computers and implanted computers, there's going to be more copy capacity than creative information. So unlike in the past, where if I made creative information and it had to be copied by hand, it was very difficult to distribute that. In the future, when you make creative information, you'll just be able to think and send it to people. So I'm going to do a little diversion and briefly talk about the difference between public information and private information. And when I talk about public information, the whole point of public information is that the creator cannot choose who the recipients of this information are. The creator is unable to choose who the audience is. And some examples: anything that's free in a library or a website, anything that's purchased in a book or a CD, public performance. This is a public performance. Private information, when you, the creator, chooses who gets that information, and everybody who gets that information, they have to voluntarily keep it secret. You can have private information within a small group of known and trusted individuals, but once they start letting that information out to people who aren't trusted, the secret gets out. So you really can't masquerade, you can't say that private information is usable by the general public. And the conclusion that I'm making is that you can't take private information, and you can't take public information and pretend that it's private information to generate an economic model. Meaning that in a world where you have all this copying capacity, you can't go out and say, well, I'll make money by generating, by writing a book, or making a piece of music. You can't say, I'm going to make money by generating this information, by treating it as private. Because once you are not discriminating against your audience, once you're allowing anybody in the known world to access this information, it is public. I have a brief slide about DRM. Do I need to talk about it?
But actually, just on the previous slide, it was interesting that the government took public information about chemical plants, which had been public for quite some time, and then tried to make it private after they decided that post 9/11 was overly sensitive.
Okay. I'm going to move quickly through this slide. Basically, how to hack private information and make it public. And this essentially is saying DRM, Digital Rights Management, doesn't work. DRM is copy protection. So it's an attempt to make it so you can't copy a CD. You can't copy a DVD. It's an attempt to make it so you can't copy the next-gen HD DVDs and Blu-rays. And basically, at a certain point, no matter how much copy protection you have, if it's a movie, you can stick a video camera in front of it. If it's music, you can stick a microphone in front of a speaker. You can copy a book by hiring a typist, which is a lot cheaper than a scriptorian. You can break an encryption key. Now, let's say you're a really savvy programmer. Oh, we have this piece of information, and you can only access this piece of information by using our special program. But the special program goes over the internet, and I can write a program that pretends to be your special program. And what it puts down, what I'm stating is, it can be seen, heard, read, it can be copied. And in the digital era, bits are bits. And it's only just a matter of time and sweat and labor to figure out, if I have these bits, what they mean. And another point that I like to make is Shakespeare was pirate. There were people who sat in Shakespeare's audiences and jotted down the plays.
Interesting.
So, thus, what are the implications of this world where you have this more copying capacity than you need, more copying capacity than creative information, instant access to information? Well, we'll need new economic models for consumable information, records, CDs, books, DVDs. Some economic models that might work. The donation tipping model, which was recently demonstrated by Radiohead. And what Radiohead did is the newest album, In Rainbows, they put up a website where they said, you pay what you want to pay and we'll let you download the album. You could pay $0 and they let you download the album. The rumor is that the minimum amount of money that they made using this model was $6 million. And they had no record company. So that was $6 million in pure profit for Radiohead. Another potential economic model that did work in the past is sponsorship. When I talk about sponsorship, I'm not talking about selling advertising. What I'm talking about is a rich person or a rich entity likes a particular composer, likes a particular artist, and they basically sponsor that artist and allow that artist to work for free, and the information is given away. A few other alternatives that I propose, and I'm going to be honest, these two alternatives, I don't know if they'll work. I think they're worth trying. They might work in special occasions. One method that might be worth trying is what I call pseudo-private information, meaning that if you're an artist, you allow people to pay for your information as if it's private for a limited period of time. Meaning, if a certain band is very popular, they release their new album, and at first they say, well, if you pay, we're only, for the first month that it's out, we'll only let people who pay get to it, and then afterwards it's free. Another technique could be expensive bits. Just like we had 1-900 numbers in the 90s, you could potentially have a way of doing data that costs money over the internet. The caveat of these two items is that if they're too expensive, people will pirate them. It needs to be cheap and easy to basically be one of the special people who gets first access to this new album, this new book, or the expensive bits, the areas of the internet that cost money still need to be so cheap, so easy that it's not worth doing piracy. If these two items are even viable, I do think they're worth experimenting with. The old economic models may still work in a few fringe cases. I do believe there's going to be a market for CDs or records as a physical souvenir for something to remember going to a concert. You really like a particular band. I don't think that they would work as a viable long-term economic model because I think at a certain point the concept of a CD or a record would be so arcane that people would rather have a different kind of souvenir. That's just my opinion. So continuing, and I'm sort of concluding what I'm going to speak, and then Jeff is going to continue for a bit. Just sort of stating what I've said earlier. Wearable computers, they're going to basically grant you access to any piece of information effectively by thinking. You can answer any question. Who's Al Gore's wife? What did Al Gore say on the 20th slide of Inconvenient Truth? You can just think this question and you'll know the answer. And when I talk about AI will be able to comprehend and summarize, meaning AI will be able to answer these very directed questions without you having to spend as much time researching. In this world where there's a lot of copying capacity, I can send an IM to you, I can send information to you just by thinking, we get the spam problem. Your attention might be constantly bombarded with either commercial interests or people trying to bother you. And another implication is if this wearable computer records your life, you might not want your life recorded. So these are the implications, and during the discussion phase we can talk about them further, whatever topics interest you most.
Okay, so we're just wrapping things up here for my stuff, and so moving into the future and covering some of the same stuff that we said, but basically thinking about new strategies for what happens when everyone does have instant access to information. It gets harder and harder to enforce, even if our current laws do make sense. If it gets harder and harder to enforce them, what are we going to replace them with? And these are some of the alternatives that I thought of, things we might be heading towards in the future. There's the way that the academic model works, and this is more what I'm used to when we publish papers and stuff. It's based on you gain currency through reputation rather than through selling X number of copies of it. There's what might be called CoSource. There was a website for a while. I think they're still around, cosource.com, and some similar competitors where you post something on there that you'd like, some problem you'd like solved. This is for software. And then there's a bidding that happens where several different providers, programmers can bid for the lowest. They'll say, I can get the job done for this much, that much, and you also can have different people stop by at the website and say, oh, I want to contribute to, I'd like to see this done also, I'd like a copy of this, and then it's agreed upon that it'll all be, it's assumed that once it comes out it'll all be freeware, but it's a way of encouraging people to come up with new to write new software and to come up with new stuff, even though they no longer have the luxury of being able to restrict it once it gets out onto the net. And another big idea, I think, is doing more stuff on the server side. Some people don't like this, but thinking about ways in which we might be moving towards MMORPG is an example of this. The difference between a massive multiplayer online game and a typical video game you used to buy is that even though your computer runs some basic things like displaying the graphics, and a lot of the central part of the game is run on the server side, and it doesn't really give you any value unless you connect up to the server and you're playing with the rest of the people. So it's another way of selling software, and especially since more and more applications are run on the net rather than on the we might be moving to a system where we all just have dumb terminals and all the programs are just run somewhere else rather than on our systems. One possible future, bundling the software with the hardware, or also charging for support, where you sell someone a system or software and the software is free, but then if they need help, if they can just get by, figure it out themselves, and that's fine. If they need help, then they have to pay for support. And of course, what he mentioned, I guess he already mentioned this, but the old shareware models, which Radiohead is sort of moving towards and stuff. And so another issue, just in the future, this hasn't been much of an issue in the past. It's becoming somewhat of an issue in the present, and I think it'll be more and more of an issue in the future, is what do we do about ownership of genetic information? And so currently you can patent things like a drug, and they're starting to patent genes now also in some cases. So you patent a drug that cures a certain disease or something, but now there's techniques that are being researched called gene therapy, where they send viruses into the body to go modify genes and stuff. Those aren't in use yet, but people are already patenting genes, and especially in the case of plants and animals, genetically modified food.
Sorry, are they patenting resultant genes, or are they patenting the process by which they change the genes?
They're doing both.
I think, yeah.
Yeah.
So what does it mean?
Yeah, so they're actually, so in 1980, the Supreme Court ruled that it's okay to patent a living organism. It was a big issue.
If you've produced it in some way?
Well, it's if you've come up with some new genetic code, like that's a modification to some, let's say it's a...
The first one was oil-eating bacteria.
So in case of genetically modified food, Roundup Ready is a product by a company called Monsanto, and they have a specific what's it called? It's a herbicide well, they patent the molecule first it kills almost anything in terms of weeds and bad stuff, and then they have specifically modified plants that with specific genes that they put in there, and they came up with the genetic code for it, that are resistant to this. So you can, if you grow their plants and not something else, then they'll survive and everything else gets killed. So they patent that gene. That's the same example. And then, but there's issues with that because, as Andy made me aware of, for instance, there was a case where there was a farmer. It was in Canada. Next to it, somewhere in Canada, there was a farmer who didn't use any of this genetically modified stuff. He just had normal crops. And then next to him
He saves his seed every year.
Right, he kept saving his seed and then replanting it. But next to him, very nearby, was an industrial farm that was using a lot of this genetic stuff. And some of the pollination came over, mixed up with his stuff. And so the new seed he was planting then was the genetically modified stuff. And then he got sued by Monsanto because then he's using their product without their permission. But all he did was plant his crops like normal, and it got mixed up. So there's interesting issues that are arising with that.
Also worth noting that Monsanto creates their seeds so that they don't reproduce, so they can continue charging those seeds.
Yeah, there's a whole complicated, Terminator topic for discussion.
Right.
But that everything they do has Terminator seed.
Everything?
Just about.
But this case with the Canadian farmer went to the Canadian Supreme Court, which ruled in favor of Monsanto.
Yeah.
He had to destroy his seed, but
he
if
had to destroy his seed because the seed crossed over, bees pollinate whole fields.
So there's no longer terminated seed.
So it's no longer terminated seed, but that's not disqualified. Yeah.
Right.
It seems absurd that they
Completely.
to do that.
Okay, so and also in a cellular biologist, Stuart Newman tried to patent something he called the human Z, and it was
what?
The human Z.
Okay.
A hybrid between a chimpanzee and a human.
Does he have one?
And he wasn't trying to do. Okay, so his main purpose. No, he never made this. But his main purpose was actually because he didn't like the idea of creating, which a lot of us don't, of creating animal-human hybrids, and so he was trying to get the patent so that nobody else could do it.
A defensive patent.
Right, and he was actually supported by an anti-biotech guy, Jeremy Rifkin. But anyway, they rejected his patent on the basis that, so it had already been established that you can patent plants and animal organisms and viruses and that kind of thing. But they rejected his patent, strangely, on the basis of slavery, because he was basically requesting to own, well, you can't own a human, but he was trying to own a half-human, and they said it's too close, it's human, so...
And it's degrading
so
the
because
chimpanzee.
of anti-slavery laws, you can't make this patent. So we're really running into a completely new set of legal problems here. Like, where are the boundaries of what we can patent? Should we be able to patent any animals, for instance? Or, and the drug, as I already mentioned, the difference between drugs and genes. Drugs used to be separate from your body and something that cures you. Now we're messing around with genes, so the distinction is blurring there. And then there's a whole issue with patient rights, and if your doctor takes a DNA sample, who is he allowed to share it with? And the same issues as with, it's already, your credit card is already sharing, companies already sharing information. What happens when your doctor starts sharing your DNA? And who owns that information? And then if you take that to the extreme, you get the questions of Gattaca-style genetic screening, where you've got if everyone's genetic information becomes public, then companies can discriminate based on risk. If you have a high risk of heart disease or high risk of being lazy or what, they look at your genetic information, you're automatically disqualified. So there's a lot of questions about what happens with free information there as well. So that's
that's
all I have to say.
That's pretty much all we have to say. Thank you for listening to us.
Continue into discussion.
Let's go to discussion.
Okay. Does anybody mind if I turn the camera around slightly?
Who owns the product?
This is going to be on the internet.
So do you mind if you're watching us in addition to the store cameras?
I wasn't even aware of that. But I think I'll stop it.